our job is to kind of help with those sort of moments where we could potentially be straying into a brand land, because nobody wants to listen to that now. The brand is funding the show. The brand is helping us develop the show. The brand is making sure that the show is tailor-made for their specific audience. So they're working with us to truly understand who their audience is, whether that's through research or whether that's clearly they know who their audience is. Maybe we'll do a bit of a midpoint rebrand in the episode, but we want to do so in a tasteful, helpful way. So oftentimes we're providing more resources to the listener viewer. We're making those brand touch points additive versus sort of shoving their way in.
All right. Welcome to the Creative Agency Success Show. As you can see, I am not Jamie or Jody, and I'm not joined as a co-host by Jamie or Jody today. I'm joined by Adam Hale. I'm Hannah Hood, and we have with us today Roger Nairn. He is the co-founder and CEO of JAR Podcast Solutions. But Roger, I'm going to kick it over to you and let you introduce yourself for us.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, my name is Roger. I'm the co-founder and CEO of JAR Podcast Solutions. JAR is one of the first ever podcast agencies in the business, and what that means is we work directly with brands to help them really make the most out of their podcasts. So we're a team that consists of producers and audio technicians and video editors and podcast strategists, and we help our clients really take full advantage of the platform.
Yeah, I can see why Jody and Jamie decided to let us guest host. They're probably pretty intimidated. It feels like we're probably going to be getting graded. So anyway, so give us a little bit of grace. We'll say that we're not the normal hosts today. So
no.
We're much better looking than they are. We've
exactly.
at least got that going for us.
This is a video podcast, by the way. So yeah,
there you go.
Well, Roger, give me a little bit of background of how you even stumbled into this space and what that looked like for you.
Yeah, so I spent 20 plus years in the advertising world. I worked for some of the biggest agencies out there, DDB, Cossette, Twice. I absolutely loved it. The agency world was my home. I was always on the client service side of things, working with massive brands like Netflix and Nordstrom and Lamborghini. But I started to fall out of advertising. I started to fall out of love with advertising. It was about the time when things started to get very programmatic, and all the creative juices were just sort of wrung out of everything, and it was all down to really finite media buys, and it was kind of a chase to the bottom when it comes to pricing. And at the time, I had started doing some podcasting just as a hobby. It was my excuse to meet some of the people that I've always wanted to meet, and I got to do that. I got to interview some of my heroes in the marketing and advertising world and design world. But slowly I started to realize, this could be an interesting business. And it was around that time that I met my partner, Jen Moss. Jen comes from the completely opposite side of the fence. She's a journalist. She's a writer. She, to this day, still teaches new media writing at the University of British Columbia. And she was very much in the podcast world at the time. And we decided, let's launch a podcast agency. I wanted to kind of recreate my agency experience, but with something that I was truly passionate about. And so with a little bit of luck and a lot of hard work, we are now, a team of 25, and we work with some of the world's biggest brands. Our clients are everyone from Amazon to Cirque du Soleil to Lululemon. We work with Deloitte and SAP, and we've got about 19 shows on the go as we speak, and our team is entirely remote. I happen to be in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, but our team is all around the world, mostly in the US and Canada, or most of our clients are in the US. And very, very excited because right now the industry is in a lot of flux, and we're seeing a lot of exciting movement.
Well, Roger, you tipped your hand. I heard the about in there, so I knew you're.
I could say roof. I could say roof too.
You're a friend from the north. Now that's cool. I mean, a lot of companies. I mean, and I am curious too because you mentioned a lot of really big brands, but most companies kind of consider podcasts more in with respect to content, which honestly is a lot of times how we view it. But you think of it more as a business asset. What's really the difference to you as it kind of relates to that?
Yeah, to be honest, I would say it's both. Yes, it's content. We, especially these days, we're very much treating the podcast as the sort of the spine of your content marketing system. So yes, it's the podcast, but also it can be chunked out into shorts, and that transcript is going to turn into an amazing blog post or newsletter article, or we have some of our clients using some of our some of the content for their live events. But the vast majority of our clients treat the podcast as a really key long form asset, because one of the things about podcasts is it builds trust. When you do the podcast well and you do it right, you have an engaged audience that's spending 30 minutes, 45 minutes every week or 2 weeks with you, and as a result your brand. And what we see in the data is that podcast listeners tend to trust the brand even more so. And I think trust is so important these days, given not only the state of the world, but also AI being what it is. We're seeing trust eroding in a lot of places, but uh, podcasts continue to be one of the channels that brands are going to maintain and build that trust.
Yeah.
So I read in your bio about branded podcasts, like that term. So like I want to hear more of like paint a picture about what that is for me. Like if an Amazon comes to you, like that just feels like it's so broad in terms of the direction that could go. So I just love to like hear how you take that and run with it from a podcasting perspective.
Yeah. So it all starts with a business challenge. In the case of Amazon, they came to us and said, I think the number at the time was about 70% of our products sold on Amazon are sold actually just by small business owners. Amazon gets a bad rap for, taking out all these mom and pop businesses. But the reality is actually it's making a lot of small businesses thrive. When you buy XYZ product, yes, it comes from their warehouse, but it originates with a small business owner. And so they wanted to deepen the relationship with small business owners. And that was our challenge. They said, make a podcast that's going to do that. And for us, that sort of deepen the relationship with the small business owner, is what we would call the job of the podcast. That's what the job of the podcast needs to do. And for us, we developed a show called This Is Small Business. We found this incredible Latina host who herself doesn't work for Amazon, but is actually someone who legitimately is looking to start a small business herself. So we let her use the podcast as her education into small business ownership. And then every episode, she interviews other small businesses, talks about the ups and the downs, what's working, what isn't. How do I build my personal brand? What do I do from the accounting side of things? What if I've got a partner who I no longer get along with? We really explore it all. Now, every episode is usually about 35, 45 minutes long. We now do video and audio. And every 6 months to a year, we do a brand lift study. And the brand lift study consistently shows that small business owners are now seeing Amazon as being on their side and as more of a trusted resource for their small business growth.
Well, that is not at all. That's what I was going to say. This isn't at all what I thought you were going to say.
Yeah. What did you think I was going to say?
Like somebody from Amazon was hosting it.
Yeah. No, yeah. That's a great point. I mean, somebody from Amazon could host it, and that's something that we would obviously consider at times. Generally, though, we are looking for an outside host, someone who isn't connected to the business but is maybe tangential to the business. I would say that it's, like I said, it's not impossible for us to find a host from within an organization. I'll give you a perfect example. We have a podcast right now called Quantum Matters, which is a podcast that's produced and developed by a company called D-Wave. Now, D-Wave is leading the world right now in quantum computing, which is an incredibly challenging topic to teach and learn. But it's going to be the next AI. I promise you. It's the absolute future. Now, we could find a journalist, or we could find an educator, or we could find a specialist in quantum. But actually, the reality is that the person who knows the most about quantum, is a guy by the name of Murray Tom, who sits within the D-Wave team. And it's just natural that he be the host of the podcast. Now, we have to be really careful because we don't want to talk too much about D-Wave, because then it becomes an ad. So that's our job, is to kind of help with those sort of moments where we could potentially be straying into a brand land, because nobody wants to listen to that. It's that turns into a 45 minute ad, right? But in some cases, it makes perfect sense that they be within the organization. But most of the time, they're not.
So is it even like sponsored? Like, are they doing like, you hear podcasts and like you have the little like sponsored ads in it? Like, is that
Yeah.
even like what you're doing in the middle of it for the particular brand?
In some cases, it is. A lot of cases, it's not. It's actually a really great podcast that's brought to you by XYZ brand. Now, the brand is funding the show. The brand is helping us develop the show. The brand is making sure that the show is tailor made for their specific audience. So they're working with us to truly understand who their audience is, whether that's through research or whether that's clearly they know who their audience is. But yeah, I mean, there's going to be some brand touch points. We are going to mention that, XYZ brand is sponsors a show. Maybe we'll do a bit of a midpoint rebrand in the episode where we'll say, hey, you're listening to This is Small Business brought to you by Amazon. If you want to learn more about Amazon and their small business program, you can go to amazon.ca/small business to learn more. Like that sort of stuff, we will definitely integrate into the show, but we want to do so in a tasteful, helpful way. So oftentimes we're providing more resources to the listener viewer. We're making those brand touch points additive versus sort of shoving their way in, if that makes sense.
That does make a lot of sense. I was curious about that just because, like, as you were talking, I was kind of thinking it sounded like it was very subtle. And I'm like, have I been manipulated by a podcast before? And I didn't even know that it was a brand. Is that what this is? I wasn't sure.
Manipulated, you could say that you've been strategically, touched in the sense that
good way to reframe it.
I'm staying away from manipulation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I'm also going to stay away from strategically touched. I can't believe I said that. But I mean, let's be honest. What we're talking about is branded content. And branded content is something that's been around for hundred some odd years. In fact, the very first piece of branded content ever was the Michelin Guide. If you're familiar with the Michelin Dining Guide, that started by the Michelin Tire Company. It was a small pamphlet that was given out about restaurants in the French countryside. Now, of course, it makes sense that it's brought to you by a tire company because you're going to be driving to all these locations. So, I mean, you could call that manipulation, or you could also just say that's a perfect brand alignment. What we constantly ask ourselves is, are we making a great podcast first that just happens to be brought to you by the brand? And then on the flip side, we always ask our clients, what is the thing that you as a brand can say, or what is something that your audience needs or requires, and only you can provide an answer to, that we can then marry up and make it into a great show. So another example, we did a podcast for Allianz, the trade insurance company. Now, first of all, when they came to us and said we want to make a podcast about trade insurance, my partner, who's our creative director, almost punched me in the face, even though she's remote, because she's like, how am I ever going to make a podcast about trade insurance? Well, when we sat down and we really, sort of developed the concept, trade insurance is all about risk. That whole industry is about risk. And they wanted to have a little bit of fun with it. So we created a podcast called Wheel of Risk. Every episode, the guest came on the show and got to spin the wheel of risk, and we discussed a certain topic or aspect in trade insuring, the trade world and risk. Now, there's actually a lot of really fascinating stories and conversations about risk, whether it's freight or whether it's ocean going cargo, whether it's air freight. There's actually a ton of different scenarios that go on in the world around risk, and it ended up being a award-winning podcast, incredible to listen to, and something we're really proud of.
Well, you've kind of talked about it a little bit and you kind of danced around. You do have a JAR framework, job, audience, result, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything we do, thanks. Yeah, we everything we do, we look at through the framework. So first is the job. So what is the job that the podcast is meant to be doing? And that's what everything sort of ladders up to. What is this podcast meant to do? And that's really, really, important and vital to create the show around. The audience is obviously, who are we looking to target and entertain or educate or inform, or perhaps there's some misconception about a topic that we're working around. And then the final is results. So at the end of the day, how do we know we've been successful with this show? Now, that's essentially the ROI question. Now, ROI is a big topic in podcasting, especially in branded podcasting, because it's like, how does this really impact our business? What's the return on investment? Now, a lot of the work that we do is sort of top of funnel, brand building work, trust building work. And so we're looking at engagement. How long are people listening for? What's the listen length or the watch length? Because at the end of the day, that Amazon show, for example, every audience member, when we do when we look at the analytics, every audience member is spending over 2.5 hours every month listening to the podcast, which from a brand standpoint is pretty much unmatched. I mean, maybe you can lock somebody in a conference room for a day and you get more engagement, but they wouldn't really be happy about it. The podcast allows you to, that level of engagement. But then there's also some B2B analytics that we can do. We can tie to the podcast. I can tell you what other companies or brands are listening to the show. Now, I can never tell you specifically who the individual is, but if their IP address is attached to a company, then we're going to be able to say, oh, to your sales team, oh, somebody from one of your prospects listened to the show. Might be worth sending an email to that prospect you've been talking to, or reminding them about the next episode or things like that. And there's a whole bunch of other ROI touch points that we can go through as well. But that's sort of what our framework looks like. And we've been in business for 10 years, and we've had a ton of success with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough whenever you're kind of thinking through all those different things. I mean, the insurance one is the one that, I mean, can you kind of walk us through an example of that from the job down to the audience and the result? Just like I said, that insurance one I thought was a great one, but any other examples of kind of just framing that out for somebody that's, thinking as CEOs out there, like, hey, I want to start a podcast. Like, how should I kind of layer that in? Just an example.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so we were approached by a nonprofit organization, or I guess you can call it an NGO, called Genome BC. Now, I live in British Columbia and Canada. Genome BC is responsible for leading the way in funding the future of genomics. And so, they're working with a lot of different groups that are responsible for that. Now, genomics is obviously a very, very challenging topic, but it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating once you really dive into it. Their challenge was that they wanted to, build the future genome scientists. And so their audience, so the job of the podcast was to, attract, educate, and engage what they called the science curious. Sorry, it was actually younger female science curious audience, so that they became, fans of genomics. And so, the job there is to educate and inspire and engage the future. Our audience is obviously then young, female, science curious, and so there's obviously a persona we can put together there around who those people are, so that when it comes to the actual development of the show and marketing of the show, we know exactly who we need to craft it around. And then the results were a number of different things, signups for programs, access, building their newsletter. There was a bunch of different subscriber touch points and engagement touch points and different things that they were measuring. But also, like, they were getting additional funding, and there was a number of different things that they were tracking. And I think we're now in season 6 of that podcast. So they continue to see a lot of success from it. We actually have all of our shows. We've won a ton of awards. Actually, the show is called Nice Genes. And in this case, we found this incredible woman as a host. Her name is Kaylee Byers, and her background is she's a rat detective. So she studies rats and the genomics around rats, and actually goes into the back alleys of downtown Vancouver and uncovers sort of their movements. It's quite a fascinating career. She loves them. She just loves her rats. It's amazing. But like, how good of a hook is that? You've got a rat detective as your host.
Well, that's pretty cool. But I mean, I guess from that perspective, like, let's say you go through the JAR framework, how do you in terms of any tricks on or tips on how to market the podcast, because something like that seems very specific. I don't know that I'd be looking up like, is there a rat detective podcast, or how would I, or would I just be typing in science? Like, what are the things to make sure? Because there's so many podcasts now.
Yeah.
How do you help market that and get the attention that it needs?
Well, so we look at it from a earned, owned, and a paid standpoint. So when it comes to an earned side of things, we look at other podcasts that we think our audience is listening to as well, and we reach out to those shows and we try to work out some cross promotion deals. So maybe we can get Kaylee on their show as a guest in exchange for one of the folks from their show to come on our show. In some cases, we'll have them feature our show in maybe some of their social content in exchange for us to do the same thing. As you guys know, there's no rules in podcasting, so all of this is organic, and all of this is just a creative way of working together. And it's also incredibly friendly. So everyone's always looking to share audience, essentially. We also look to work with Apple Podcasts and Spotify. They have different mechanisms that allow you to pitch them essentially on featuring your show in their directories. A lot of people think that when you get featured in the directories of Apple, for example, you've somehow beaten the algorithm, but there is no algorithm. It's actually real editors in Cupertino, California, that are broken down into the different categories in the platform. And there's if you just search Apple Podcast pitch submission, you can actually pitch them on why your show should be featured. They read them all the time. We've had a ton of success there. But then there's also sort of the PR side of things, reaching out to different publications, finding ways for them to get coverage of your show. Treat it like any other piece of content or any other announcement, but you want to kind of do it consistently. And then there's the owned opportunities. So if you're an organization that has a newsletter, big social channel, think about all the different think about all the different owned channels that you have. There's your audience right there already. So leverage your existing audience and help them, become followers of the show, but also help them help you grow the show. They want to see the show's success. And then finally, there is paid opportunities out there. So we oftentimes will put some money against growing our show on other podcasts. There's a whole bunch of different networks out there that have buy opportunities. In those cases, it works very similar to programmatic advertising, where you can target specific demographics and psychographics and geography. So you can target the specific people. So you and I could be listening to the same show, but hear completely different ads. We've had a lot of success that way as well. I think the most important thing, though, is audience growth and the marketing of your show actually needs to start at the very, very beginning. You need to create the podcast so that it is as marketable and easy to promote and write for your audience in the very beginning, so that when the show is live and when the show is ready, it's custom tailored specifically for that audience. Then the other thing is that, as you guys know, a podcast is a living, breathing thing. This isn't live radio. This isn't, a television program where we're putting a ton of effort into it and then it's going live and we can't really ever edit it again. Every episode has the opportunity to be learned from. So we're always looking at the analytics. We're always looking at the data, but we're also listening to our audience and we're talking to our audience and we're asking them questions like, what topics do you want to hear about? What topics do you want to learn about? We've even done that with entire shows. We did something for the cosmetic brand Lush. Excuse me. We did something for the cosmetic brand Lush, and we started out by asking their very engaged community, hey, we're thinking about doing a podcast. What would you like the topic to be about? And at the time, it really got whittled down to self-care, taking self-care into your own hands, really putting the self into self-care. So we eventually created a podcast called The Sound Bath. It was meant as a podcast to be listened to while you're in the bathtub with one of their bath bombs. In fact, every episode started with the sound and sizzle of one of their bath bombs sort of melting in the bath. As a side note, we originally wanted to record the entire podcast in the bath. We wanted the guest to be in the bath and the host to be in the bath. But then the lawyers got involved and said that that's potentially electricity bath. We just don't want to do it. But we try. We
The
really tried.
electricity bath was the problem. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That was the problem. Yeah.
For
That
us.
was the problem. Yeah. I mean, everything else up to that, they're fine with.
Okay.
For a lot
To
of
be
these
fair, we weren't
brands,
doing video at the time.
Oh.
that makes it totally fine.
This was pre-video.
For a lot of these brands, I think there is, kind of speaking of a brand like Lush, like there is a monetary ROI that comes out of these. But I think for many podcasts, and I think ours is one of those, is sometimes that ROI is a long-term play. So, and how are you selling these people on the KPIs and the measurements of success that are not necessarily tied to a monetary outcome? Like, what are those, and how do you essentially communicate that value to them to make sure they understand that that's what success needs to look like for their podcast?
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to sell anything unless you have gained their trust, and trust is, trust is something that is earned in drips but lost in buckets. And a podcast is a drip, and it's going to take some time, but it is the best medium for building that trust. And so we're measuring things like engagement, and we're measuring things like repeat listenings or repeat viewings. We're measuring yes, subscriber growth, and yes, audience growth, but also what's the quality of that audience? Like, what is the engagement level of? I can get you 10,000 followers, no problem. But if you do the math and you look at the analytics, if they're only listening for 30 seconds, that's not really an audience. But if I'm getting you, 2,000 audience members, and they're watching or listening for 80 to 85% of every episode, which is our goal with every show that we do. That's an incredible amount of engagement. Now, one of the challenges that we always face is how do you take that sort of top of funnel and dial it down to dollars and cents? That's something that not only podcast has challenges with, but any sort of content marketing has challenges with when it comes to more of that top of funnel. But most marketers these days understand that, and there are certain channels in their mix that they need to have in order to build that trust and build that top of funnel. And so it becomes something that we're seeing more and more. It's interesting. When I first started the business 10 years ago, we spent a ton of time educating the market on, like, why should I move money away from radio into podcasting? Right. Or like, why should I move money away from, display ads into podcasting? Now we're way past that point where brands now understand that they need to be, brands, not all brands are into podcasting, but they understand the why behind it. And they no longer see it as sort of an either or. It's more like, where am I putting my marketing dollars in the business right now? And podcasting for the most part is very much something that most big brands are doing. It's not something for every brand, because there is a cost. There is a lot of time and commitment that goes into it, as you guys both know. But most larger brands are very much into podcasts and have multiples.
Yeah. And like you said, you multi-purpose the content into that's what it's been tremendous for us as well. Just providing that content to go out to other platforms and everything is huge. So, kind of, and you talked about this earlier, building trust with the group. We heard a futurist talk not too long ago, and her quote, I'll probably mess it up, but, she just said that when knowledge is abundant, trust becomes scarce. And so that seems very true today. So hearing people talk on podcasts and everything, and I'll go ahead and broach the subject, but AI, you didn't even notice, like, Hannah's not even real. So
it's not even real.
Yeah,
she glitched at She glitched at one point, but I just thought it was a glint off her glasses.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah. So, they're getting so real these days. They can interact. I didn't know, like, how is AI interfering with all of these things? Not only like, making it easier to do podcasts, maybe content, those kind of things, or maybe people are using AI in place of, but then just it also kind of messes up all the all the metrics and how to find things. And, so just kind of your overall take on all things AI and how it's impacting kind of your space, your world, what you see for that.
Oh man, this could be a whole separate episode. So the first thing I'll say is AI is going to completely disrupt the production side of podcasts. There's no doubt about that, and that's coming from somebody who's in the industry. And I will also say that we use AI all the time in our business. We're using it for research. We're using it to get some writing off the ground. In some cases, we're using it on the sort of guest search side of things and research side of things. There's a number of different places where we apply AI and generative AI and LLMs to everything we do every day. But what we don't use it for is to tell stories. And that's the piece that I think won't be replaced by AI as we go forward, is telling true, authentic stories. And that's something that I think humans innately crave. Storytelling and true stories. And so we really feel bullish about podcasts in the nonfiction and true sense of the world. If I was in the business of telling, creating fiction podcasts, I'd probably be really worried. But we are really leaning into nonfiction, true stories. My partner always likes to joke, do you want to hear a podcast interview with created by AI about a man who climbs to the top of Mount Everest with no arms or no legs? Or do you want to hear from the actual man who climbed to, top of Mount Everest with no arms and no legs? Like, we all know the answer to that. And that's something that we're going to always be looking for, is those true, authentic stories. And that goes right back to the trust conversation, is as long as brands are telling these stories or bringing these stories to the surface, I think that there's always going to be place for that long form storytelling. Now, on top of that, I think there's a backlash on AI as a whole right now, especially when it comes to the generation of content with it. And so I'm kind of enjoying watching this sort of wave happen, because it's exhausting. First of all, I should also mention that there was a recent report that came out that said that 50% of the podcasts that are out there right now are made by AI. And there's a few companies, I'm not going to name them, who are making like hundreds of shows a day using AI for whatever reason. I think it's for advertising purposes, but I just don't know who's listening to those and who wants to listen to those. And they're even busted because some of those shows are like medical based, which is frightening.
Yeah, it is.
And so I think that we're seeing obviously this sort of the boundaries being pushed on content creation, but I think people at the end of the day crave true, authentic stories, much like, sitting around the fire. Like, it gets kind of cliche, but it's true. And so we're going to keep telling those. And we truly believe that. So for us, I'm going to get really philosophical here, but there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world right now. I think a lot of it comes down to us not having enough conversations with one another. I don't think we're listening to one another, and I think there's a lot of big nuanced conversations that need to be happening. And I believe that brands have every reason to be part of those conversations. In fact, because of their sort of social impact and cultural impact, I believe that they have a duty to be part of those conversations. And so we really look forward to helping them, look forward to helping facilitate those conversations as we go forward.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think you're spot on. I think the challenge is going to be, though, is sifting through all the noise. Like you said, if they're polluting the airways, all these, and they can do it not only on audio, but they can do it on video as well. I mean,
but also I think there's I forget the name of the director, and he's not like a Steven Spielberg type, but he's a pretty well known director, and he had a quote. Sorry, I'm missing the name, but he essentially said that we are innately programmed to detect when something is fake, and I think we're all really starting to work that muscle out, and even though it's going to get it already is getting incredibly difficult to understand. But you ask any Gen Z, they're already like well versed in what is real and what is not, and they're like they can spot it a mile away. I think it's some of the older generation that's taken a little while for them to sort of work that muscle out.
He was looking at me, Anna, whenever he said that. Did you
I
see
think
that?
he was. Mhm.
I'm sorry, who was it?
He was making eye contact with you.
Yeah, that kind of with me whenever he said that. I get it. Yeah, yeah. I don't agree. It's just
You meant Gen Z, right?
right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's me. Yeah, I don't know. It's gonna be tough. I mean, I also see that like the younger generation, some of it might be that their detectors are better, but some of it's just they seem more cynical too. They just like right out of the gate, they just don't believe. You know, you used to be able to like play, you know, you'd be like, hey, which hand is it? And like do some stuff like that with kids. Now they're just like, nah, it's all fake. It's like, what? No, like it's real. And so they just
I really did take your nose.
everything's default. Like, no, it's not real. So
Yeah. No,
So
you're,
it's-
yeah, you're great.
Well, how would you recommend that somebody differentiate themselves and set themselves apart, like in all the noise? Like, what are like 2 things that somebody could do
Ooh.
to make sure that that stands out immediately? That way, if somebody's muscle is not as strong in that space, they stand out.
Yeah, I mean, first is just be your true authentic self, and that involves like I think podcasting is its best when it's not perfect and it's not completely polished. It's not broadcast TV, it's not the film industry. Like there needs to be a little bit of raggedness to it because that's authentic and that's true as long as it is authentic and true. So I think really leaning into that, and then the other side is involve your audience in the production so that there is a co-creation that goes on. Um, there's a real magic that can happen when the audience feels that sort of level of connection and they see that this isn't all, you know, Hollywood scripted and this isn't all like massively pre-planned. They get to be a part of the production, and that's something that, you know, I think that's something that we need to see more of.
Our podcast should be a hit then because it is definitely a little rough.
But that's okay. I got my kids' Hot Wheels in the background, right?
That's awesome. You can see
It's
mine
actually
back-
really cool. It's a really cool like dinosaur thingy that picks up cars. And anyways,
Yeah,
I get it to
absolutely.
pick up my beer cans.
Awesome. Okay, so off the wall question. But like, the bathtubs has me think like, what is the strangest place they've asked you to podcast from, or topic? I guess. I mean, you've thrown up some good ones, but you've got to have one that you've had in your back pocket that you just haven't.
I'll tell you a bit of a funny story. We hired someone who was an audio technician. He's still with us. He's our first ever employee, Sam. And we asked him one day, like, Sam, if you could make any podcast with a brand, what would you want to make? And he said, Sam has a very serious lactose intolerance. In fact, he like cannot touch lactose. And so he's got some gastrointestinal challenges. And he said, I would love to make a podcast with Tums. And it would be all about like stomach issues, like just, you know, everything that goes on with the stomach. Well, fast forward, I think it was about 6 years, and I was on the stage at Podcast Movement giving a talk. I was part of the panel, and the MC had given us pre-guided questions, and so we were nailing all of our answers and things like that. And then he randomly, just out of the blue, asked a question similar to what you just asked, Adam. And he said, you know, well, if you could make a podcast with anybody, who would you make it with? And the first thing that popped in my mind was Tums. I want to make a podcast with Tums. I want it to be all about stomach issues and da 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 da. And you know, everyone laughed. And as I got off the stage, and this guy walks up to me and he says, Roger, you're not going to believe this, but I work for Gray, the advertising agency, and I represent Pepto-Bismol, and we would love to discuss this idea with you. Now, I had a bunch of meetings and things were happening. Unfortunately, the entire team on the client side got either moved or laid off. I can't remember what happened, but it went. So if there's anybody out there who's watching this that has any connections or is perhaps tied into, actually, it's funny, the team that was in charge of Pepto-Bismol is also in charge of Preparation H and a few others, and they call themselves the Butts and Guts team. And so if there's anybody out there from the Butts and Guts team, give me a shout, roger@jarpodcast.com. I want to talk to you. I got an idea.
That's brilliant. You should so that's how you should flag down everybody you want to work with. Just make sure you have that ready to go whenever you go on your tours, and just throw it out to the audience and be like, "Oh yeah, perfect."
It's my white whale.
Wow,
It's my pink whale.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't think I'm ever gonna be able to forget like Butts and Guts. Like,
Isn't that amazing?
Like, yeah, that's
awesome.
Yeah, they should lead with that for sure.
Yeah.
A lot out of that.
Well, Roger, thanks so much for joining us. This conversation has been a lot of fun. Like, I didn't expect to laugh so much during this, and just to hear all your fun stories, that's been really fun. Outside of working with you, because what would you tell somebody, just as our final question, is one piece of advice if they are thinking about starting a podcast or want to start a podcast?
Yeah, it's literally just start. Whether that's buying the equipment or that's finding your first guest, or it's writing down the idea, just go step by step and just kind of slowly keep moving. The worst thing you can do is overthink it, and just be your true authentic self.
Can I have a 1B, Hannah?
Okay, fine.
Since you said start a podcast, how about improving a podcast?
Improving your podcast is really zeroing in on, what does your audience need, and how can you authentically deliver that to them, that ideally nobody else can.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think sometimes in the podcast space, you see things kind of morph over time just naturally into something else. I think they start very audience-centric, and then sometimes they'll move around. So I think, making that your North Star and coming back to it always is really important. That's great advice.
And if you do record in the bathtub, keep the electrical equipment far away, and read the disclaimer at the bottom of this episode.
And the bubbles high, hopefully.
Exactly, yeah. Totally.
Awesome. Well, Roger, if somebody wants to connect with you outside of this podcast, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, check us out at jarpodcast.com, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hang out there. And if anybody has any questions, you can also just email me, roger@jarpodcast.com. Looking forward to hearing from you all.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Roger.
Thanks, guys.